that sell-off really began not the Tuesday night of the election, but really later that night going into Wednesday. So that was covered by the latest COT report, and sure enough, was a fair amount of short covering as expected on that sell-off. Well, hello there, my friends, and good afternoon. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics in what I promise will be a rather action-packed show because there is plenty happening to dig through, including potential escalation of the war, the bank gold and silver short positions, as well as some new data that has come out from the Silver Institute that will update the projected deficits, which we touched on a little bit last week, but we'll dig into more here. And to begin, let us take a look at the silver price just before 11 a.m. on Tuesday morning. See, it's basically flat on the day, down 4/10 of a penny now at 31.23. And if we take a look back on the 1 week here, you can see obviously we did have that rally yesterday, and prices starting to rebound a bit, got down to below $30 there, the low 29.75, and that was back on Thursday of last week. So we've rallied a bit since then, back up, let's call it almost $1.50 since that low point. And as I'll touch on in just a minute, I think one of the things driving that is the rather alarming things that are happening with missiles going into Russia and permission thereof. So we will touch on that, but first, a quick look at gold, which we see at 26.27 on the December futures, which we'll get that loading here. Gold also rebounding in the last couple of days, as you can see here, got down to about the 25.40 level. So $80, $90 higher since the low point. And what is particularly interesting is that mentioned in the past week how that sell-off really began not the Tuesday night of the election, but really later that night going into Wednesday. So that was covered by the latest COT report. And sure enough, as we mentioned on our Substack, which you can find at goldandsilverdaily.substack.com, was a fair amount of short covering as expected on that sell-off. Here we can see the banks reduced their net short position in gold by 15,570 contracts as the price fell during that reporting week from 27.58 to 26.01. There you can see the reductions on the swap dealer or bank net short position. Of note, that has been a rather substantial reduction in that short position, which you can see here, because back on September 24th, it hit an all-time high of 259,000 and change contracts. And that is the point down here, which was the record. We've seen some volatility, so maybe you could say we're starting to develop a trend there. Again, we'll see, as always, what happens on this week's report, but has come in quite a bit since then. Just under 200,000 contracts at 198,126 contracts short. And we did have a similar situation here in silver, where they reduced the short position by 5,700 contracts as the price dropped from 32.85 to 30.77. Did go below $30 at one point. And here you can see that brings their net short position down to 33,000 contracts. And the high for this year was 44,000 contracts, although the all-time high, 49,609 back in July of 2016. So seeing a reduction there. And again, I guess the way I would phrase it is that doesn't necessarily mean that we've seen the bottom of the sell-off. Perhaps with the price movement of the last 2 days might suggest that that's the case, although especially when you're seeing short covering at these levels, well, A, it's providing bids to the market, and I would say the best takeaway is that perhaps the idea of the banks getting the gold price back down to the $2,000 range to cover more shorts getting a lot less likely. So we'll see. And again, it's been somewhat choppy over these past couple of weeks, but big reduction in the short position. Not a short squeeze of sorts just yet, but we will see how that develops. And certainly not the best time to be short, in my own personal opinion, because we had the news here came out 2 days ago. Russian officials say Biden decision to let Ukraine fire missiles deep into Russia could lead to world war. Obviously, that I think most people think that's not a good thing. It's tragic that I think there are people who do think that's a great thing. Some people are going to do it, maybe don't think it's a great thing yet. Seems like it did not take long between Joe Biden's decision and at least here's a CNN report. Ukraine fires US made longer range missiles into Russia for the first time. And reminds me of some of the, I've been going through a bunch of Pepe Escobar and Michael Hudson is someone he speaks of quite highly. And listening to some of their interviews, where I continue to hear that there's a growing realization that Russia is winning and is going to win the Ukraine war. And it's how much is the US going to continue to push them and step over red lines? Well, certainly this is not a good escalation. So, and meanwhile, as that is happening, we continue to see the dollar rallying, although has sold off a little bit over the past couple of days here, and really was just below par just a couple months ago when the Fed was doing their 50 basis point cut, has rallied over 6% since then. And that was another thing I found interesting because if you actually look at gold and silver, they're down slightly. Probably, actually, let's take a look back here. If we see where gold and silver were back in the Fed's rate cut on the 18th, so gold now had gone lower, as you saw down there, but now, obviously, of course, when they're cutting 50 basis points, you would expect a reaction in gold and silver. Although what I awkwardly pointing out here is that given that the dollar index rallied 6% over those 2 months, the fact that gold and silver are still up, let's take a look here at silver, which is probably back into positive territory since that September 18 rate cut. Ah, there we go. So here we go back on the 18th, and yep, silver just about flat. So some ways I would say that's a positive for gold and silver when you do have that type of rally in the dollar index. Whether that should be what drives gold or silver prices, I will leave for you to debate, but to the degree that there is a large correlation. Also, makes you wonder what will happen if the reaction in the dollar index is anywhere near similar to what happened last time, because you had here in November of 2016, it was down below 95. October, Trump wins, and then by December and January, we're up over 103, and then by 2018, less than 2 years later, it was under 90. I continue to wonder if we might not have a similar effect as perhaps a realization gets priced in, different from what Wall Street is seeing it as now, where tariffs, tax cuts, pro dollar, yet the fact that if you do that and the spending cuts on one hand does sound good, on the other hand, you're very likely going to get higher deficits. So even with the cuts, still blowing out the deficit, adding to the debt. And that's something we will touch on a bit more tomorrow with Steve Cope. I have a Luke Groman clip, a fascinating one, pulled up ready to go for him. And we'll talk a bit more about that. Yet, either case, gold was also 1,300 when that happened, and you had the sell off after Trump in 2016. So, certainly, as you're well aware, the price has doubled since then. And also, again, the effect on the dollar was a bit short lived. And I would imagine we may see something like similar to that this time around as well. So we'll check back in 6 months on that. Also, we did have some new data that came out from Silver Institute last week, which they were calling for a new record high in industrial demand. I believe the second largest overall demand. Supply, mining supply only rising 1%. And also, they did update the deficit figures which I thought was interesting because just a day before that came out, I'd mentioned how the silver funds had added over 100 million ounces of silver since March. And as you can see here, initially in the report that Silver Institute put out back in April, you can see net investment in ETPs. They had called for 50 million, and in my article, I was suggesting that they might have to be revised upward, and then if so, that the deficit when accounting for the ETPs might be bigger than we expected. And here was the number 265 million ounces back in April. And in the report they just issued, now that's up to 282 million ounces. And they have updated the ETPs, ETFs, funds, whatever you want to call it, up to 100 million. So at least now I know there are different schools of thought of whether physical investment and ETF demand should be included in the total figures. Again, you can take a look at the report or this article explaining it. Um, but in either case, if you do, and if the metal is added, it is going somewhere. So Silver Up Institute actually increasing their figures. And as this is happening, of course, we also have Elon Musk, who seems to be gaining increasing influence in the upcoming Trump administration. And it reminds me of some things that he has said. Now, this one came out last week. Solar power will be the vast majority of power generation in the future. And as I know you are already well aware, that there is silver that goes into the solar generation, which has been one of the major factors driving those deficits that we've seen. And in fact, this I had mentioned a couple months ago, although we have some video today. So let us play this one here. An interesting snippet from Elon.
You could actually power the entire United States with 100 miles by 100 miles of solar.
Really?
Yes.
So you could just pick some dead spot that you fly
Of
over,
which there are plenty.
cover that sucker up
Interesting look for Joe Rogan there, but we'll continue.
with
Correct.
solar panels and charge the whole country
Absolutely.
24/7.
We need batteries, but yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not hard. It's very feasible. The sun is converting over 4 million tons of mass to energy every second, and it's no maintenance. That thing just works. We have a giant fusion reactor in the sky. That is the sun.
So there you go. And now, not just him saying it, but also in more of a position where he could actually move something like that forward. Interesting because Trump's comments does not seem to be a big fan of the green agenda. And I would say if we do have an overtly recognized recession, a lower probability that if you get stimulus on the fiscal side, that comes in the form of green energy, yet we'll see how that balances out with some of the things that Elon has talked about. And just to give you an update, there's a variety of sets of numbers of how much solar capacity was actually installed. There's a handful that have put the number at 440 for 2023, some in the 530 range, but either case, at least according to Ember's data, they had 440 last year. And based on the data so far this year, and this was produced in September, looks like we're on track for 593 gigawatts. And in the coming weeks, I've actually been digging through some solar data because the new panels do require more silver. Now, there has been thrifting going on that brings down the amount in these new panels less than it previously had been. In either case, hit the subscribe button and we'll keep you posted on that as I'm putting together a report with some things that will hopefully help put that in context. And then a few last notes. Here was an article recently how Chinese solar firms are going further afield where US tariffs don't reach. Some of the biggest Chinese-owned solar factories in Vietnam are cutting production, laying off workers, spurred on by the expansion of US trade tariffs. Meanwhile, in nearby Indonesia and Laos, a slew of new Chinese-owned solar plants are popping up out of the reach of Washington's trade protections. So again, as you see any of these plans, keep in mind that capital is going to find alternate solutions like this. So that is another one of the drawbacks of sanctions and tariffs. And sometimes they do not play out as expected when implemented. And keep that in mind over these next couple months. And here is an article just commenting on how climate experts are viewing Trump and obviously his agenda, which has promised to encourage the production of fossil fuels and rein in Biden's green economy spending. He also said he would withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, as he did briefly during his first term in office, and also mentions down here that it did not sound like, yes, he said Trump. This is Todd Stern, a former U.S. climate envoy, said Trump would try to pull back Biden's green spending through legislative mechanisms like the Inflation Reduction Act, which I don't think brought down inflation all that much and actually had a lot of solar subsidies that were extended. And anyway, it will be fascinating to see how this all progresses in the weeks, months, and years ahead. We're going to get some change, and hopefully we can all just navigate. I guess governments are going to do different things over time. You just navigate it as best as you can. Although helping that navigation process, I might add, just in time for the holidays, no less. Something that I know many of you have been waiting for a long time and is finally here is that I know you've always dreamed of having a silver minted helicopter Ben Bernanke statue, and now is your chance to be the first on your block to get a 26-ounce, 3/9 fine silver chopper Ben. You can shower your desk with $100 bills and Ben's familiar brand of easy money love. Although, to give you a better look at it, here are some thoughts from other industry experts, including Craig Hemke and Bill Holter. So let's take a look at what they had to say. Here is the silver chopper Ben Bernanke.
That is so cool.
Can you even see his tie flying in the wind while he throws out $100 bills?
Look at him getting ready to throw that money out there.
I see that.
Because that's what it looks like when
That
Ben
even looks
Bernanke-
like his sorry ass.
Look at the size of the bald silvery head.
Yeah.
It's enormous. Back propellers spin too.
How many ounces is that?
That's 26 ounces of 3/9 fine silver, homie.
As you can see here, some of the key features with your silver chopper Ben figurine, you can really get the control panel. Look, there's a whole dashboard for Ben to fly.
He wants to fly onto your desk and throw
Yeah,
$100
here,
bills
Ben.
down. Look at the precision.
I see that.
Crazy old bastard.
He's got 2 sets of spinnable propellers
This
built.
thing is great.
Dude, you could fly that thing.
Wow. I could.
Look how happy he is. I think he's actually going to get out there and throw the $100 bills.
Jerome, no!
There'll be $1,000 bills by then.
I got this!
I like it.
Get the history before it's made.
So there you have it. That is what the propellers look like when they are spinning. And this also comes with a complimentary #GotSilver coffee mug and pillow. And you can find out all the details about that by clicking in the link below. And one last note that I will mention about the Silver Chopper Ben. If you're worried about the Fed cutting interest rates again or doing QE and you're trying to protect your assets against inflation by purchasing gold or silver, no, this is not the way to do that. But if you're looking for a darn cool toy that will make you smile and chuckle, he is quite handy at that. And the reason it took so long is that initially they were even more expensive to make, and they were coming with a multi-$100, unknown at the time, customs bill that people didn't receive till afterwards. So we spent the last couple of years finding someone in the U.S. who could make them and bring the price down. So in either case, you can click on the link below to find out more about that. And he is available if you order before the end of our Black Friday sale, which ends on Cyber Monday at midnight. Can get him there in time for Christmas and the holidays. So click the link below. Hope you're having a great day out there, and we will see you again tomorrow.